This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
An interview with the man charged with fixing the state's failing schools tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We're joined tonight by Eleanor Boudreau, correspondent with WKNO FM Radio. Chris Barbick, superintendent of the Achievement School District. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Bill Dries, reporter with the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for being here. You are superintendent of the Achievement School District, which I would define, but I'm going to give you a chance to define it better than I do. But the state's effort, the new effort that came in with Governor Haslam to take care of failing schools across the state, a big number of those, some 68 out of 85 are in Memphis. Mm-hmm. Tell me, though, what is an Achievement School District and what's your role with that?
Sure. So the Achievement School District really came out of the Race to the Top application, which actually predated Governor Haslam. That was done under the Bredesen administration. It was the state's application to do lots of education reform statewide. And one of the things that was in the application that Tennessee won and got a $500 million federal grant to implement was, what do we do about those just persistently struggling schools? The schools that year after year, we're seeing just abysmal academic performance. We define that as the bottom 5% of the schools in the state. That's 85 campuses statewide. And the majority of those schools, like you mentioned, 68 of the 85 schools are here in Memphis.
And you I think, took the job a year ago, is that about right?
I've been here 18 months.
18 months, and you have started with which schools and how many schools in Memphis, and give us a sense of the expansion plans, and we'll talk about some of the specific successes and so on so far.
Sure. So we spent the first year just really, getting a team together, getting a plan together, and we're in the middle of our first year of actually operating schools. So we have 6 schools in the Achievement School District. 5 of those schools are here in Memphis, and we have 1 school in Nashville. Of the 6, and part of what we can do, we can either run the school ourselves and become basically the district for that school, or we have the ability to authorize charter schools. And so of the 6, 3 of the schools are schools that we're running. All 3 of those schools are in Fraser. They're in the Fraser High School feeder pattern. So 2 elementary schools, Corning Elementary and Fraser Elementary, and then Westside Middle. So the 2 elementary schools that feed into Westside are the 3 schools that we're running. And then we've also authorized 3 charter schools, 2 charters here in Memphis and 1 charter school in Nashville. And the 2 charters, one is Cornerstone Prep, which is running in Lester Elementary, serving grades pre-K through 3. And then we started Gordon Science and Arts Academy with Gestalt Community Schools, which runs a couple of schools here in Memphis. And they're serving the middle school students zoned to Humes Middle School, but doing it right now on the Gordon Elementary School campus.
And we'll come back to Humes and Gordon in a second, but just a quick, you'll add how many schools next year?
Next year we plan to add 10 schools, 2 that we'll run ourselves, so 2 more in Fraser, and then we'll have 8 charter schools operating next year, and all 10 of those schools will be here in Memphis.
And at what point would you have the full 68 truly under your umbrella?
Well, we've projected out about another year, and we did this plan when I first got here, so we'll spend some time this summer kind of revamping and re-looking at that. But our goal in 14-15 would be to ramp up to about 35 schools, and we expect 80 to 85% of those schools to be here in Memphis, since that's where the majority of the schools are.
Bill.
Let's talk about Gordon for a second, because you're looking at moving Gordon out of the school where you coexist with the conventional elementary school into Humes Middle School. Mm-hmm. And the city, the countywide school board has approved an optional school for Humes Middle School. Right. So how are those talks going? Are you at cross purposes, or are we looking at a building that's big enough for both of these institutions?
Yep. So we think we are looking at a building that allows us to do both, so that this can be not an either or, but a both and. And just a little history. So we approved and authorized Gestalt to run a school in the Humes neighborhood last year. This was after there were already plans and talks to do something with Humes, and we wanted to, try and develop a good working relationship, with Dr. Cash, because, at this point, he was still here, and, talked about Gordon, and the thought was that eventually, that was one of the schools that the district was looking to potentially close, and so the idea would be, they would start at Gordon next year, and there would be room for them to expand. The challenge is that Gordon Elementary School is not an ASD eligible school, so we don't have any control over what the district does with that school. So if you remember earlier this year, they announced they were going to close the school because of the ASD, and we just wanted to be clear that anything that the district did around Gordon Elementary School was a district decision, because it's not a bottom 5% school, and if they chose to close it, that was their decision. And when they chose not to, and then put something in Humes, they kind of left. There was nowhere for the middle school neighborhood kids to go. They couldn't expand at Gordon because there wasn't enough room for them to go there. And if they turned the whole building of Humes into a performing arts school, you were going to have to bus the kids, the middle school students that lived in the neighborhood, to another building. So that's when we went back and said, look, we can't have a place, we got to have a place for these guys to go to school. Mm-hmm. So, Humes has capacity for anywhere from 1,100 to 1,300 kids. We feel like there's room to put the Gordon program back at Humes to serve the 450, 500 kids that would potentially be in that middle school program from that attendance zone, and also have plenty of space for the performing arts school. So I think we're pretty close to having that done. We had a good conversation last week. I have a meeting actually this afternoon with Superintendent Hobson and some of the folks on the administration there.
Is there could this be a legal test of the ASD's authority? Because I think Dorsey Hobson is the former general counsel, of course, for the school system. And he said if push comes to shove here, I think we can make an argument that we can close it and reopen it as an optional school. I think you've expressed kind of a different opinion that the ASD can do this, can take Humes if they want to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping it doesn't come to that, but if it does, I mean, we're pretty confident that the way the law reads is we were essentially serving the Humes students before that school was closed, and even if the school is closed, the schools stay put until the list gets rerun every 3 years, and this is to, and I'm not suggesting this is what the district is doing, but I mean, we could see a situation where districts decide to close schools or change grade configurations or change attendance boundaries as ways to get around being taken into the ASD, and we don't. So we wanted to make sure the law was very clear that there was no way for those sorts of things to happen. And again, not suggesting that's what MCS is doing, but hypothetically, you could see superintendents and districts that may want to do those things. So what we're saying is, when the list came out, Humes was on the list, and until that list is rerun, we have a legal authority to serve the kids that go to that school and to do it with the Humes facility.
Is that specific school and that specific disagreement or difference of perception, however you want to put it, with the school system, is that typical of your interactions with the school system, or is that the one example of a difference of opinion? I mean, how has it gone?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think overall it's gone very well. I mean, if you would have asked me when I started, I was expecting a pretty confrontational relationship, and I think that everybody in the district, MCS, the folks that we're starting to get to work with now in Shelby County, have handled themselves incredibly professionally. Really, and it sounds cliche, but really tried to put, the students' interests first. And that doesn't mean there haven't been times where we've disagreed and butted heads, but it's been a little bit of an arranged marriage, so to speak. And when those things happen, we sit down and we work them out.
Because to some extent, to put it, maybe callously, I mean, it's basically the state saying, you guys, MCS, couldn't fix this, couldn't serve these students well, weren't spending the money wisely. We're going to hand it to Mr. Barbic here.
Well, I think that it's a situation where these are, we're 6 months into this work. This is tough work, and I think that we recognize how hard it is, and I like to think of it more as we're bringing some more resources and people to the table, and if we can work together to bring the schools to a place where we all want them to be, let's not spend our time bickering. Let's spend our time sitting down and figuring out how we can work together. I mean, let's face it, there's a $168 million shortfall in the budget. If we can, bring resources together and work together and allocate resources in the most strategic manner possible to serve all the schools, that doesn't just help us, that helps the district, that helps the new merged system. And I think there's a place for all of us at the table to do that.
Yeah, a lot of your strategy seems to be extend the school day by an hour and a half, and then have this incredibly intensive hiring process that emphasizes just how hard this work is going to be, with the teachers that you're thinking about hiring. And I'm wondering, how many of those lessons do you think can be applied to the Memphis City School District, or what will become the merged, Shelby County School District? Because it takes a lot to extend the school day and ask everybody to work extra hours.
Yeah. Well, I think it's way too early to say we have any lessons learned that can be applied anywhere, because we're still pretty early in, and we're approaching this with the right degree of humility until we actually get some results. So, I think you're right. I mean, this is tough work. It's hard work, and I think could someone spend their entire career in a turnaround environment? I think there's some people that could, but this is intense work. I mean, it would be like asking a doctor to spend their whole career in the ER. I mean, that's just, it's intense, day in, day out work. And I'm not sure every doctor wants to spend their whole career in the ER. I mean, this is a situation where, maybe you have somebody coming in for 5, 6, 7 years, and this is the kind of work that they want to do. But I think it's too early to say, long-term sustainability in an environment like this, if that's possible or even should be possible. And I think as we get further into this and see, the kind of sustainability that folks, coming into this work can manage over time, then I think we'll learn a lot more. But, especially this time, I mean, February is the longest, shortest month of the school year. I mean, it's just a tough time of year. And, I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you our folks weren't feeling that. But I mean, we've got, I'm in the schools on a weekly basis. We have incredible people day in, day out who are just rolling up their sleeves and doing really challenging work. And, we're out right now trying to recruit another group to come in and serve the 2 more schools that we're going to be working in next year.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I've met a lot of your teachers, and every time, I interact with your schools or your teachers, I am struck by how, I guess, intense, these people are. But, and again, the extra hours, when you're looking at ramping that up, where are all these hires going to come from if you go from, 6 schools this year to 35, even more down the road?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think, short term, we have to try and incentivize folks that are already here to want to work in schools where kids need them the most. So really trying to find the best and brightest people here in Memphis or in the region who want to roll up their sleeves and do this work. I think longer term, we have to do 2 things. One, we've got to really try and develop pipelines of teachers, alternative pipelines, so really tapping into the ones that are already there, but figuring out how we, bring in different types of teacher training programs that are maybe more specific to turnaround work. We're talking to a group right now called Relay Graduate School of Education, which works in a couple of regions around the country, to possibly come to Tennessee and help us with this work. And then I think we've got to import some folks. I mean, we've got to, really make Memphis sort of seen as teacher town, and a place where, teachers want to come and live and work. And, there's a branding campaign and a recruitment campaign that we're working with some folks around the city. It's called Teach 901. They have a website where we're trying to really, brand Memphis as teacher town. This is a place where, on a $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 salary, which is what we're paying our best teachers, or will be paying our best teachers, that's a pretty good income in Memphis with what the cost of living here is. I mean, something just came out a week ago that said they're at 3rd best cost of living in the country. And so we want to really try and attract people from other places to want to come here and work.
Logistically, how does that work? Just so people understand, you go in, you take over a school, there are teachers in there existing. You are under no pressure to continue to use those teachers? You can you can turn over the entire staff if you want?
Yeah, so the way that relationship works, we say, look, we're a different employer, so we're not MCS. And so you can certainly apply for a position with us if you want to come work with us. It would be like, a teacher moving from MCS to Shelby County. They go through an application process. They have the ability to choose that, and then we have the freedom to make decisions around how many of those teachers we will keep.
Roughly what percentage of teachers do you end up keeping or reapply and are accepted into the ASD environment?
So this last year for the 3 current schools that we're running right now, because the charters, again, they have their own processes, but for the 3 schools that we're running, we had roughly, I think, 80% of the teachers choose not to apply. So only about 20% of the teachers applied for a position with us.
Even applied, okay.
And that's what we said, look, we can't offer somebody a job that doesn't apply with us.
Right.
And then of that 20%, we actually made job offers to about 3/4 of those teachers.
And the other thing, when we talk about teachers and hiring, and for some people this is, a good thing, some it's a bad thing, I just am curious, unions. I mean, are the teachers who work for the ASD unionized?
No, and really with a lot of the changes that have happened, in the last couple of years through legislation, I mean, there's no collective bargaining, tenure's been reformed. I think the influence and power of teachers' unions, not just in the Achievement School District, but across the state, is really a lot less than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Okay, Bill.
Chris, you've had several meetings. I think you've got one this weekend with the parents over at Cornerstone, which used to be Leicester in Binghamton. How are things going over there? Because that relationship kind of got off to a rough start with the charter operator.
I think we've turned a page. I mean, the hearing this weekend's being done by G.A. Hardaway, and I think Dr. Harrington's going to be there as well. So they've called the meeting. I'm going to be there as a member of the audience. Curious, listening. Making sure that there isn't any new feedback. I mean, nothing's changed in terms of there's no new allegations. There's no, this will be the third meeting we've had. I think this meeting. I hope it's a productive one. Again, there's nothing new to report or new to talk about. So, it's another opportunity for folks to I guess, discuss their concerns. And if there's any new ones, then we'll follow up on those. I think, what really changed the conversation was the parents who are at Cornerstone really starting to speak up and say, look, we're happy. We've got a lot of parents, the majority of the parents at the school are happy. And a lot of the folks that were had concerns about the school weren't parents of kids. It was folks in the community. Some of them didn't even live in the community. They sent their kids to private schools. So when you really start to sit down and talk to parents in the school, that's our stakeholder, that's our customer, and we certainly don't want to ignore the concerns of folks in the community. And Lisa in her article, and we've said, look, could we have done a better job in how we entered the community of Binghamton? Absolutely. And those lessons will get, have been learned and will be applied moving forward. But I really hope now the conversation moves towards how can we work together? How can we make this a solution-oriented conversation and not just be another repeat of the things that have already happened? Because I feel like we've heard that. I've had a dozen meetings with folks in the community since that initial meeting in December, and I hope we can start to focus on solutions now.
The competition that's happened in the first school year of this operation, I know you and Dr. Cash had talked about some of the give and take in that, and my sense in talking with him is that it was a friendly competition, but it was also a pretty spirited competition because you are competing for some of the same teachers who obviously are head and shoulders above what you might see in most of the applicants there. So has the competitive element of this been more intense or less intense than you thought it was going to be?
I think it's been appropriate. I mean, look, I really developed I really enjoyed working with Dr. Cash, and I know folks around the city have varying opinions. We had a great relationship. I consider him a friend. I sent him several notes after his decision to step down and just wished him the best. So I think, Memphis was lucky to have him. I think a lot of good work was done in his administration, and I enjoyed working with him. We're developing a really good working relationship with John and with Dorsey. And so I think, it's been coopetition or frenemies or however you want to say it, but I think it's been an appropriate level. And like I said before, I think everyone's handled themselves in a really professional way under some pretty unique and sometimes difficult circumstances.
I want to go ahead and note that that's the first time someone has said frenemies on this show in our 2.5-year history. Along those lines, charter schools, people have varying opinions about charter schools, but that's going to be a big part of how you expand. Some schools you take over, you said, and some you bring in charter operators. What is the advantage of charters? Is that a solution? Some people point to charter schools and say that's the future of not just low-performing schools, but all public schools. You come from a background of some very successful charter schools in Houston that were serving really underserved kids and kids who weren't going to college and suddenly were. What role do charters have going forward?
So I don't think it's the answer. I think it's part of the answer. I think where I hope we can shift the conversation as a community and really as a state and as a country, if you will, is less about governance and what type of school it is and really about quality. So, if you talk to parents, they could care less what the governance model is for their school. What they care about is there a good teacher in the classroom? Is the principal accessible? And is this a good school? And they could care less whether it's a charter school or a traditional public school or a private school. And I think as a community, we need to be focused on, is this a good school or not? And is this a quality school? And if it's quality, we need more of that. And if it's not, we need less of it. And really get less hung up on what type of school it is. I think there's a place for quality charters. Look, there's great traditional public schools in Memphis and in Shelby County, and we need to give the principals in those schools autonomy. And there's great private schools serving low-income kids, and if there's a way for those schools to grow as well too. And I think as a city and as a state, we need to be thinking about how we replicate and increase success, and how we figure out how to turn around and replace low-performing schools. And I think charters are a part of that.
Yeah, so the incredibly ambitious goal of your district is to take schools that are among the bottom 5%, move them to the top 25% in the next 5 years. And that's a somewhat unique, formulation to your district here in Tennessee. So what happens, 5 years down the line if you don't make that goal? Do you pack up and leave? Do you say it's a success if the test scores go up? Mm-hmm. Do you change everything you're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll give you kind of what the law says happens, and then kind of how we're interpreting and trying to implement that. So at the end of 5 years for the schools that we're running, one of three things happens. And this is regardless of whether it's successful or not, and then we'll talk about, hopefully the success that we're going to have. One is we give the school back to the district. So we say, look, we've had it for 5 years. And the ASD was never, the intention was never for us to run the schools permanently. It was 5 years. We can either give the school back. Secondly, there's a parent trigger law that says if 60% of the parents would like to keep the school in the Achievement School District, that can happen. So, we'll honor that parent, voice and request, and the school could stay in the ASD if the parents want it. Third is we could actually convert the school to a charter school in that 5-year period. And even if the school's a charter school, whether it's one that we would potentially convert or the ones that we're authorizing, right from the beginning, like the two I mentioned earlier, that's still it's a 10-year charter. And at the end of the 10 years, the authorizing responsibility shifts back to local control. So in every scenario, the intent and goal is that this goes back to local control. We hope that our schools are successful within that 5 years. The list of priority schools gets rerun every 3, and our hope is that, for the schools that we're in right now, 5 years later, those schools are in the top 25% in 5 years. We'll be monitoring those schools we do school quality reviews every year. We're looking at results, and if it looks like things aren't going the way we want, then we can replace the operator. We can replace a charter with a different charter. We can replace ourselves with the charter. And so the whole point, like I said, is to be focused on quality and not type of school. We think that we're moving the schools in the right direction, that they're going to get where they need to go. If they're not, then we'll replace the operators, and quite frankly, I'll probably get replaced too. So that we're all under some
You don't
big
get
goals.
tenure. You don't have.
I don't get tenure. I don't.
You mentioned private schools, and we have just 4 minutes left in the show, so we'll run through a couple of things. There's a voucher bill, opportunity scholarship, whatever you want to call it, but basically a voucher that would go to, as it's framed right now, bill that would give lower income folks, people in the bottom 5% schools, maybe a voucher to go to private schools. Are you directly involved with the voucher program at all?
I'm not. I mean, the voucher's directed at kids that are in ASD eligible schools,
Right.
but we wouldn't be managing that program. We'd have no affiliation.
Right.
It would just be an option if it's passed for those parents to opt into one of those schools.
How does you also mentioned the salaries and the money and bringing more resources to the problem? How does the money flow? If we can say, I pay property taxes in the city of Memphis or the Shelby County, then there's money that comes from the state. Do you guys take the money that would have otherwise gone to the kids in that failing school, or do you bring extra dollars to it?
A little bit of both. So
Okay.
the per pupil dollars follow the student. So
Okay.
if a student is now in the ASD, the state and local dollars that the district would have received to educate those kids, since we're now educating them, we receive. We are bringing some federal dollars. There's school improvement grant dollars. For the next year and a half, there's some race to the top dollars that we're bringing to the table as a way to try and
Yeah.
turbo boost, at least in these early years, the turnaround in the school.
Okay.
But over time, our plan is to be sustainable on the per pupil dollars, state, local, and federal that we would receive.
Another question, just a logistical question. When you take over a school, are you also in charge of the physical plant? Is it everything, or is MCS still take care of the physical plant?
We're responsible. We have shared service agreements with the district, so we're
Okay.
paying them for things like maintenance and food and transportation, and we're paying them on a per-student basis for some of those services.
Another thing that you mentioned, we were talking before the show, you talked about as you're ramping up, you're hiring more people. You're based in Nashville. I mean, the Department of Education is, State Department of Education is ultimately who employs you, I guess, right? But that you're going to shift more staff to Memphis. Talk a little bit about that. And I think to some people that's a welcome development because they think all these things come on down from Nashville,
Sure.
but people don't necessarily understand the makeup of Memphis. And so more of your state employees, the Achievement School District people, the administrators and so on, will be based here.
Right, we're in the process of shifting employees here. We have about 15 people on the ground providing support to our schools. Even though I live in Nashville, I'm here 3 days a week, so I'm actually here more during the work week than I am in Nashville. And so, yeah, I mean, our goal is to shrink the size of the Nashville office and shift employees here. And in general, just to keep the office lean to begin with. I mean, we're not looking to create another big central office bureaucracy, period. But for the folks that we do have on our team, we want as many of them closest to where the kids and students and teachers are to provide that support. And right now, that's here in Memphis based on the number of schools.
And just, I mean, sort of 30 seconds, when you go into some of these schools, there must be some things that are being done right. I mean, they're in the bottom 5%, but you look in there, I mean, what kind of things do you guys go in and say, wow, that's a great thing that's happening there that we want to take advantage of? Or is it that you walk in and they're really disaster zones and there's nothing going on?
No, there's good things happening in the schools. I mean, I think in every one of these schools, you're seeing just heroic efforts by people in the school, whether it's teachers or folks on the administrative team who are working really hard, and we see and recognize those people, and they stand out, day one when you step in the building.
All right. Well, thank you. We're out of time. Thank you for being here,
you.
Chris Barbich.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.